Definio. Parish-shaped maps capture moments in flux. Slippery histories hard to read on today's landscape. Lines in fields erased. Boundaries dissolved. This far, no further, meaningless now. A fydd y difau dal yn oroslu bu ei hen famau yn pori, now that the wall is more blwch than barrier. They'd be free to pass ancient peripheries if they wanted. But this clinging to heft is instinct. Our desire to lay claim to land keeps us penned in, binds us in grass and gair. In the end, though, it's the land that claims us. Poets and writers last night had something personal to say to Gillian, and what I decided to focus on to pay tribute to her was the fact that what I really liked about Gillian's work and has really inspired me is the fact that she seamlessly brings Welsh and English in the same poem. So it's not a matter of she's writing a poem in English which is then translated, that she's actually fusing the two and talking about the tension. Well, she doesn't talk about it's there on the page, the tension between Welsh and English. And, you know, Gillian wasn't raised speaking Welsh, even though she had Welsh-speaking parents. And so she had to learn it and reclaim the language as an adult, just like, you know, I learned it too. I wasn't raised speaking Welsh. But I do use Welsh a lot, and my children go to Welsh school. And I have begun to write in Welsh, but my poetry is not good enough in Welsh. My knowledge of the language isn't. But I have begun, and in the poem I read earlier, Definio, and that is about definitions and boundaries, and I'm trying to find out what are the boundaries between these two languages. And yeah, I'm really disheartened and worried about what's going to happen with Brexit. I think it's been premature and not thought through. And I mean, a lot of the people I've worked with, for instance, up in the Gurnos and various projects up in the valleys, they've been funded by European money and initiatives. And I think the Welsh language too, there's been a strong impetus to protect, preserve and encourage minority languages, and that's come directly from Europe, and I'm quite anxious about what's going to happen as a result of that. And currently working on my second poetry collection. I've currently been working on that for a couple of years. I had funding from Literature Wales for a bursary, and it's been slow percolating, and I think that's okay. Because I've had lots of other projects too, and I'm also poet in residence in a medieval house not far from here in Abergavenny, and so I'm trying there. What I've been doing is just collecting sounds. This house is being renovated by the Landmark Trust, and my remit, the goal I set myself was not to go and write poetry, because I do that, that's how I normally see the world and collect ideas and process. I thought, no, I'm going to stop myself from doing that, because it's a bit of a defense mechanism in a way. I wanted to try something new. So I've been recording sounds for the last almost 2 years now. And so what I hope to do is to do something with those sounds and I don't know, manipulate them, listen to them away from the house, and then respond in poetry to the actual sounds. And then hopefully we'll have an open day where they'll be installed. I really loved his work, and when I went into the competition, I'd read as much of his work as I could. And my English teacher, Cliff James from Blackwood Comp, he did know him, so he used to drip feed me little anecdotes. And I even went looking for his. Apparently, John Tripp when he was a kid, he put his feet in wet cement outside his house. So my poem that I won the competition with was called In Search Of, and it was in search of John Tripp, because I went up and down the streets in Whitchurch looking for his little footsteps in the ground, but metaphorically as well, I was doing that, trying to get into those rhythms. And I loved that he wrote about, you know, things I could just visualize, you know, the valleys, and it was just everyday talk, but it also had undertones, and that really triggered something for me. So I think this year marks me having been back in the UK for longer than I lived in New Orleans, which is a bit of a grief for me, because I always like to say, oh, I lived longer as an adult in New Orleans, in the deep south, than I have in Wales. But that was hugely influential on me, those years I spent there.
First came across Gillian's work during my GCSEs. We weren't focusing on her, but she was in the anthology that we were learning about Caroline Duffy and Simon Armitage from. First encounters with Gillian's work was during other lessons at school, when I should have been doing maths or geography. I was reading poems under the table, and before that I'd kind of been of the opinion that I didn't like poetry. I liked stories and novels, but poetry wasn't for me, and my encounters with her poetry sort of changed my attitude to it. So I'm really grateful to her in terms of opening my eyes to the world of poetry. Richard Gwynne, who was teaching me at Cardiff Uni during my undergraduate, asked me if I wanted to do a creative writing MA at Cardiff, and I hadn't considered it before, but when he asked, it suddenly made sense, and luckily enough I got a scholarship to do the Masters, so I did that and had a really wonderful time studying the Masters at Cardiff Uni. And the thing that I really like about that Masters is that there's a teaching element to it as well. And since finishing my Masters, I've been doing quite a lot of creative writing workshops in schools and teaching creative writing as well. So at the moment I'm just working on finishing my first novel. I was lucky enough to receive a Literature Wales bursary, which came to an end last year. And so I'm just working on finishing the novel now, and it's a dystopia about sea level rise set in the future in the UK, which is something that I think is, I don't know, with the weather at the moment, it feels more relevant.